Well, we're going to move our program right along, and actually we're going to make some modifications in order to expedite it, simply because Dr. Ife Williams has a little crisis in her office that she needs to attend to, and we want to be respectful of that. We don't want to lose her as a panelist. So we're going to move to our panel right away. But before I do that, let me just acknowledge first Ms. Rosalind Prudhomme, who is assistant to all of us in the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, who is making all of our work so strong. Attorney Akichi Taifa is in and out. I guess she's now back out, but she's standing in the hallway organizing and mobilizing. There's a lot of stuff happening today, by the way, around, and I'm forgetting the brothers. Martin, I got the last name, Trayvon. A lot of activities going on, and so she's in and out as well. But she's also on the Shirley Chisholm Presidential Accountability Commission. Also want to acknowledge Reverend Joseph Evans. He's here as the senior pastor of Mount Carmel Baptist Church, and he will be hosting an important town hall meeting around the war on drugs coming up in June. We'll be talking about that at the end. So what I'm going to do is forego my remarks until the end. I was going to do a little overview. I would forego that. I was asking Bill to come and give some major reflections, but instead of doing that, I want to ask our entire panel to come now. I want to ask our moderator, Verna Avery Brown, to come so that we can then now get into a discussion. We will have time for some Q&A, hopefully. So first and foremost, let's welcome our moderator. And early on, I acknowledge and express thanks to WPFW for having interviews and also doing PSAs on this particular activity. It's not easy to get people to come out at noon on a work day, and on Capitol Hill, which is not the easiest place to access as well. So because of WPFW and all of those who work together, at least have this occasion, which, as I should say later, I think is incredibly important. So would you please welcome the co-producer, co-moderator, is it, of What's at Stake? And she has done all kinds of great things at WPFW, including national programming. I've had the privilege of working with her on a number of projects over the years, and whenever I think of someone to work on these projects and co-moderate, I always think of none other than the voice. She has an incredible one. And the journalist, the scholar, the activist, who has done such incredible work at WPFW, Pacifica, Washington, D.C. for so many years. Would you please welcome our moderator to the panel, Verna Avery Brown.
I'm going to have to live up to being that person that you introduced me as. Thank you all for coming. Wow, what about that documentary?
Yeah, wow.
Is that incredible or not? I am so amazed and a little dismayed also that something, this event that's so historic and so rich has really been kind of like a best kept secret in politics. You know, we get to see the endless loops of the police dogs, you know, attacking the marchers, but where is this kind of information where, you know, black men and women are standing up strong and speaking truth and trying to direct the future of our lives through a strategic political plan? We need to see more of that. I want to hear more from Dr. Daniels about where this film has been and how we can get it more widely distributed. How many people here were actually at dinner? So I want to introduce our panel, our distinguished panel. Joining us for this discussion, Bill Lucy, longtime unionist, founder and president of Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. Bill Lucy. Carolina Bird, an activist, a radio talk show host, and organizer of the Hip Hop Caucus. Dr. Juliana Monroe, the author and social critic, president of the College for Women. Dr. Monroe. And finally, Dr. Ife Williams, professor, radio talk show host, president of the National Congress of Black Women. Thank you all. Into the issue. Bill Lucy, as the only member amongst our panelists who is actually at Gary, give us your reaction to what you saw on film and your first-hand account of what it felt like to be part of that history as it unfolded.
Well, let me say, I want to take issue with Ron. It was not one of the best meetings. It was the best meeting among Black political, social, cultural leadership to take place in this country ever. And if you listen to the incredibly prophetic speech of Jesse, he touched so many bases. It's important to remember what he talked about in the context of the changes that have taken place since Gary. I just consider myself fortunate to have been there and to have had the opportunity to see and associate with some of the best thinkers and best minds and most committed activists in generations. We saw so many people who have made such an impact on not just the history of this country, but the history of the world. Shirley Chisholm, there have been 4 folks, or at least 4 good contests for the presidency of the United States. Shirley ran first, Jesse ran twice, and Al Sharpton ran one. The occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is there because they ran. And Gary was the catalyst to just believing it could be done. It's hard to talk about Gary without thanking Dick Hatchman, a young mayor, and as you saw, a very determined and very focused individual with regard to politics in general and Black politics particularly. Mama Mary Baraka, who was the sort of anchor of this thing. There was a range of thought that went so far to the left, so far to the right. There were Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Nationalists, you name it, it was in that room. And to be able to have a convention like that meant that you had to have some strong leadership focused on an incredible outcome. And everybody, at least my assessment, is both folks were there because they knew it was time to do something different. We had activists in all the parties, but our basic problems were the same. And so the question becomes, how do we begin to have a thought that these things can change? And again, as Jesse said, he talked about it from soup to nuts. The one thing you did not see there was a big promotion of labor. Organized labor in 1972 was scared to death of a meeting in Gary, political context. Those of us who were crazy enough to go felt this was a marvelous opportunity to make the ongoing connection between political advancement and labor input. There have been no revolutions that have succeeded without the input of workers. So labor was central to that. And so those of us in the coalition of Black Unions went for that specific purpose to be a part of that change. And I think Ron would say that's an incredible unity that came out of that meeting, both among institutions and among individuals. People who you run into today who in Gary have a bond with each other because we recognize the kinds of changes that were made. Somebody mentioned South Africa. Nobody ever believed that apartheid could be beaten except folks from Gary. Nobody ever believed that Zimbabwe would change except people from Gary. And you can go across Africa, South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe, India, you name it. And the commitment to work on those movements and support those movements were here. Right here in Washington, D.C., we had the Free South Africa movement. Yes. That mobilized this city and this nation to oppose apartheid in every form that it took. Equally true was the battle around Zimbabwe and others that have taken place. And I guess that flowed out of the belief that we could do it. And there were no rules for Gary. I mean, none whatsoever. And those of us who were there, and I want to acknowledge the one who just came late, as an integral part of the structure and operation, Tony Harrison of Gary.
That's my friend.
Oh yeah. And because the issues were so, I mean, just so key, folks had the midnight meetings, and then they had the meeting after the meeting, and then they had the meeting before the meeting to make sure that you didn't get lost in the going along. But I would say it was just one of the most incredible experiences as a trade union I had. I babble on, but I apologize.
Now you founded the trade union for Black Trade Union. Shortly after that, did you leave?
By the end of that year, the Democratic National Convention came along, I believe, October, November, sometime around. And it occurred to some of us that the two parties, the Republicans went for Nixon and the Democrats, at least labor, went neutral. In our community, if you're neutral on the candidate, that means one ain't no better than the other and none no worse than the other. And for black labor, there's no way you could come back, campaign, comment, talk to your community and say that our experiences with Richard Nixon were somewhat different than George McGovern. And so we said, there's got to be a voice for black labor in this decision-making process. So we formed the Coalition of Black Trade Unions, and we've tried to be in the game ever since then.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Malveaux, now, you were a young college student in '72, already fully immersed in your political consciousness. But you shared in an earlier interview on WPFW that the process, the way the Gary process was structured, it had a personal impact on your being there or not being there. Explain exactly.
Well, I was a sophomore at Boston College in 1972, and actually we were there. I wasn't there, but two of my classmates were. We voted, of course. We all were revolutionaries. We had this consensus kind of thing, so we stayed up all night. Finally, I said, okay, guys, I'm not going to go. It kind of broke my heart, but I was in Little Rock for the follow-up meeting, so that was cool. But the audacity of black people coming together, we really got the vote in '64. I mean, we really got the vote in '64. There were people who were voting before that, but by 1964, when the Voters' Rights Act had passed, we could see more black voting. In 1968, Dr. King was assassinated. So this was just 4 years after Dr. King's assassination that people had the audacity to come together. There were a lot of people from Boston who were there. Some of our elected officials, just some of the Bowlings, which was a big political family in Boston. I can't remember the brother's name, Rob, probably you do. Bill Owens, who is the state representative from Boston. And so we were all organizing on the ground and raising money for people to go. We were doing a number of other things, doing backup. And when folks came back and did the report back, I mean, we used to do report backs. People go to Congress, people come back and share what had happened. And it really was very galvanizing. It really made me decide that I was an econ undergrad major, and I thought I was going to law school. But I decided, no, it was econ that we needed to do. I think in 1971, the Congress of Black Economists, which is now the National Economics Association, was founded, and older economists were really making it their business to reach out to younger people and encourage them to study economics, encourage them to get a PhD. Bob Brown from the Black Economic Research Center was present, and we used to actually have the Black Economic Research Center once upon a time. It was up in Harlem, 125th to 123rd Street, actually in Brownstone. And that summer, I went to work for basically the Black Economic Research Center. It kind of was a funny story. David Swinton, who's now the president of Benedict College, and one of my mentors, who encouraged me to go work at Benedict College, was a young PhD from Harvard. And he had 3 women working for him who were all undergraduates. And he used to lock us in the basement because he felt we were scandalously dressed. We would wear things like hot pants in the street. And he's like, no, and he was a Muslim. He remembered the nation. So he's like, no, you cannot walk around, looking like that. You got to be more modest. At one point, he bought us robes. With caftans on if we wanted to walk down the street. But that's just a boring aside, or interesting aside for the time. patriarchy, et cetera. But I went to work for Burke, and that basically caused me to look at economics in a different way. People were not really teaching Black economic development. The stuff that my last book is about, Surviving and Thriving, 365 Facts in Black Economic History, we didn't have classes like that. I mean, you had a nascent Black Studies curriculum that was basically formulated around the humanities. It was not formulated, and possibly sociology, but not necessarily anything that had to do with economics. And so the consciousness raising caused us to do any number of things to respond. The following year, in '73, I went to work for Essence Magazine as their first college editor. And that was my first encounter with Reverend Jackson. My boss at Essence, not the editor, but the woman who supervised me, Lynn Taylor, was a good friend of Reverend Jackson, and she did all his PR. So a group of us, as you said, about the meeting before the meeting, the meeting after the meeting, meeting after the meeting, just to make sure that everybody was on top of everything. What I would also really say about Gary for us as a people, I mean, I think it had personal meaning for anybody who was a young person at college who went there. You know, many campuses, of course you couldn't send everybody, so many campuses still 1 or 2 people. But I think the other real impact is just really seeing our empowerment. Lots of people were motivated toward politics after Gary. But the tension between Gary and Little Rock is always a tension that we still have. We really have not made up our minds to have an independent Black political movement. That there were always African American people who were so vested in the Democratic Party that they could not see their way clear to sitting out an election. People would come up with the same rationales we come up with now. Well, what about the Supreme Court? You know, well, what about it? You know, I mean, never mind. I would not want to send to appoint a single Supreme Court member. But you know, you know, you know, I'm free now, so I get to say stuff like that. You know, I used to say that well, I was president then, I was supposed to be neutral, but I'm free now. But in any case, so I think a lot of people's consciousness was raised, and a lot of people really decided they wanted to get involved. You know,
since you say you're free now, can I ask you what time is it? Is it nation time?
It's nation time. It's nation time, but it's a muted nation time. We have become too satisfied. The Black middle class, although it's lost so very much, I mean, the Black middle class is being eroded significantly. We lost over $200 billion worth of wealth with the housing crisis. 1 in 5 mortgages, 1 in 3 Black mortgages is underwater, which means you owe more than your house is worth. So the Black middle class is complacent. You do not have people who are, all that energy. I mean, when I look at that song, all that energy, I think about 1984, which I would consider, Bill talked about the Sharpton race and I think the Chisholm race and the Chisholm 72, Jackson 84 were our pivotal races. That, to me, represents the height of Black politics. And if you think about that 1984 convention, I was in San Francisco, which is home. I was there. I actually ran for office that same 84, got my butt beat, but I ran anyway. But one of the things you saw was just the energy of Black people, absolute energy of Black people. Out there, I mean, maybe last night in Florida, maybe there was a little bit of that energy with 30,000 people, but I have not seen that kind of energy, that kind of audacity. I mean, when Reverend Jackson said he said, I don't trust Black Republicans or Black Democrats, or white Republicans or white Democrats, I want a Black independent political party. Well, we have now gotten in bed with the white Democrats and with the white Republicans. The Democrats believe we have nowhere else to go. The Republicans either ignore us or find a show dog, or forgive me, white they find somebody to front, you know, as their person. And so while it's nation time, intellectually, I don't see our bodies, you know, somebody said that on there, you know, your body's here with me, your mind's on the other side of town. Literally, our minds are on the other side of town. We're trying to get rich, you know, we're trying to, we have even, I mean, one of the saddest things about being president of the Senate is that I understood how many people have divested in their kids in education. How many young people come to school and their parents won't help them. Or, you know, young people come to school and parents help them the first year, you're on your own, you're 19. And, you know, meanwhile, tuition room and board is $25,000. You know, our average young person comes with a gap of about $12,000. Once upon a time when I wrote for USA Today, I said everybody should go to college free. Unfortunately, some parents have found that talent and sent it to me. Did you say everybody should go to college campus? I said that in '89. But I had a totally other job. But you know, we have divested the people from things that we used to be very invested in, and that's the tragedy.
Absolutely. Dr. Ife Williams, I wanted to sort of pick up on the whole Shirley Chisholm factor, because Shirley Chisholm was clearly a part of the political landscape, smart, black congresswoman from New York, and how she actually received 152 first ballot votes at the 1972 Democratic National Convention. She was, of course, the first major black candidate from a major party to apply, run for president, as the first woman to run for the Democratic presidential nomination. Question: how did that Shirley Chisholm factor into the national black political agenda at the Gary Convention?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for bringing up the name Shirley Chisholm, and I want to compliment the people who held the Gary Conference. As I heard Jesse, I believe, talked about strong men keep coming, I wanted to say, women. Sometimes we are the forgotten group. Shirley Chisholm was one of those women who didn't allow us to forget what women are doing, have done historically, and what we will continue to do. I'm pleased to have with me today the chairperson of our local chapter of the National Congress of Black Women, Johnny Scott Rice, who is an heir to the Shirley Chisholm estate. We also have all of her materials, or many of her materials, I should say, and she was my predecessor in being the founder of the National Congress of Black Women. So you see, I have very, very big shoes to wear, because following her was C. Dolores Tucker. Shirley Chisholm, even today, when mentioned in a crowd of women, it doesn't matter what color, what culture, what ethnic group, where in the world you mention it. When you mention the name Shirley Chisholm, there is somebody in the audience who was impacted by her, and you get this big applause for her. We are very pleased that she is one of two women with a portrait in the United States Congress, in the halls of Congress. And again, she was the founder of our organization, so we have to continuously be impacted by her. The other woman, if I may add, in the United States Capitol is that of Sojourner Truth, which our organization also had the opportunity to place in the United States. We know about these strong women, and we kept seeing them in the Gary Convention. But unfortunately, the film doesn't portray where Shirley or where any of the very strong women had those impactful speeches, and we know they were there, and they had a lot to say, and they've been saying a lot since that time. But fortunately, their messages continue to live with us. I mean, Shirley Chisholm is like, if we had a goddess, Shirley would be our goddess for all women. I'm scheduled to speak at a conference of women next week, and of course, I've been asked to talk about that legacy. And we very proudly do that. And I said, you're one of those very strong voices, and we want you to wrap it up and inspire and achieve. And I'm very pleased, because women like Shirley Chisholm inspired me to be able to do that now. Dr. Dorothy Irene Hyde is another one. This is women's history, so forgive me if I have to understand what she asked and add the others. Who was my neighbor, who was my good friend. And I remember, even though our organizations seemed to be, in competition with one another, they were not. Trust me, I would go to Dr. Hyde and kneel at her knee any day and ask her questions, and I'll never forget she told me, she said, well, baby, it doesn't matter whether somebody likes you or you like them in your organization. If you're making up a fuss, what you do is you involve them, you bring them in, give them something to do, and I've been doing that ever since, and I've grown the organization that I chair from 6 chapters 6 years ago to nearly 100 today. So I love
Now, Dr. Williams, I really do want to understand what kind of how was that diverse political gathering? How did they receive Shirley Chisholm's actual candidacy? Because you had the communists, the socialists, the independents, the black nationalists, the Democrats, the Republicans. It almost seems too diverse. Were they able to bring all that diversity together and be, viable and significant beyond Gary? There's 2 questions rolled in one. But if you could really address the one with regard to Shirley Chisholm's candidacy.
Well, I was not at Gary, and I'm not, real happy about that, because I saw a history here today that I didn't know about. I've heard a lot about it, but didn't really know about it. But I think what happens is strong women never allow anybody else's process to interfere with the process they have or with the plan that they have. And Shirley was one of those strong women who was able to overcome being left out. You know, some women will sit back and just say they wouldn't allow me to do things. I wasn't included, but there are people like Julianne and like me and like Shirley and others who do it anyway if it has to be done. You know, there's an African proverb that says, it is the women who hold the sky up. And some of us have internalized that. We believe that, and Shirley was one of our teachers to let us know that. So that's why we continue to follow her today, because she was one of those. And we're not bothered by being called strong women, you know. We don't have to be called beautiful and all that kind of stuff. But we are strong women, and Shirley Chisholm taught a lot of us how to be that.
Okay, I want to give
Yeah, let me just add on the Shirley Chisholm question. Everybody should read her book, Unbought and Unbossed. I mean, she does address it in some ways in the book, how her candidacy was received. It was not well received, quite frankly, by African-American men. It was not well received by African-Americans on the left. Remember, this conversation was just about not trusting the Democratic Party. 152 votes, electoral votes, is not a lot of votes. However, if people ask her to get out of the race for various and sundry reasons, the same arguments you've heard used before. I mean, Ron Daniels ran for president in 1992, and folks said, you're going to drain votes away from Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton, whoever. But whenever there's a third-party candidate, the rap is always, you're going to drain votes away from the Democrat, as if we are beholden to the Democrat. And so that was the argument with Shirley Chisholm as well. She, as I said, people entreated her to get out of the race, and she refused to. So your point about not asking for permission. And she didn't ask anybody, can I run for president? Indeed, the white women Democrats were so ignorant that in 1984, when Geraldine Ferraro was running for vice president, they put it out there at the Democratic convention that Ferraro was the first woman to run for national office, which y'all know was a lie, a tale, and everything else. We didn't pay attention to the Andrews race. Other women have run on third-party platforms, but Shirley Chisholm ran as a mainstream Democratic candidate, and the party did not give her ever any respect for that. While, you know, we have named our commission the Shirley Chisholm Presidential Accountability Commission, and certainly the National Political Congress, of which that political Congress was founded at the 1984 Democratic Convention because we African-American women, I was a member of the founding board, we African-American women felt so dissed by the white women. They actually, there were all kinds of stunts they pulled. I mean, they were so happy about Shirley Chisholm that they couldn't see the forest for the trees. So lots of statements were made, not Shirley Chisholm, Geraldine Ferraro. They were so happy about the Ferraro thing that they really couldn't see the forest for the trees. We in San Francisco, I was part of the Democratic Women's Forum, and we had a number of rallies outside City Hall, et cetera, and we literally had to fight, I mean, get ugly to get our African-American sisters from other parts of the country on these rally spaces. These white women were just so ecstatic about Ferraro that they couldn't see anything else. And so C. Dolores and Shirley Chisholm called a group of us together, and it was really kind of ragtag, whoever was there. And then, you know, it turned out to be about 40 women in the room, and we talked about how the Democratic Party essentially continued to disrespect black women. Paying a little bit of attention to the men, a little more, because the Jesse Jackson race made people realize that they had to take African-American people seriously. The number of delegates that Reverend amassed was a significant number. But that was also very interesting because I had just started doing radio then, and the public radio station had a person from the Jackson campaign, a person from the Mondale, a person from the Hart campaign every morning before the convention. Rap, just, you know, do an hour of what's going on. And I was a Jackson delegate, so, you know, I was the person. And the Mondale person was just ignorant and smug. And I, you know, well, the Jackson people are gonna have to come around. I mean, that was their line, the Jackson people are gonna have to come around. And a lot of Jackson people didn't come around. Even though Reverend Jackson did campaign for Mondale, but essentially, the Jackson people did not in mass come around. So, you know, they did not understand the nature of collaborative politics, and they were prepared to leave black people on the sideline. And we didn't learn from that. I mean, that's the worst part of it. We didn't learn from that. We can't, you know, how do you kiss a man who don't like you? You know, I mean, I've never been able to do that. But that's literally what we're doing, kissing a man who doesn't like us, or a woman, whatever. But, you know, how do you get in bed with somebody who doesn't want to go? And that literally is what we kept, oh, Democrats, here we are, oh, Democrats, we want to talk to you, and, you know, we might get it for holidays, so, you know, I'm telling you I'm not going.
And that was
But they said, there's the door.
That was really the essence of the whole the Gary Convention. To clearly define the path that blacks are going to take and get out of this cozy relationship with the Democratic Party.
That's a script.
Okay.
The intent here was to have an impact of great significance on the campaign and the issues that were going to be discussed in that campaign and the final outcome of who the nominees were going to be. That was the underlying purpose of Gary, as I recall it, was to have for the black community a definitive statement on what that campaign that year was going to be about and where was going to be our place at the table and our issues to be discussed.
So was that?
Now, if I missed something now, I'll stand corrected.
Tony, I think that one of the challenges, though, was while that may have been the intent, the folks who showed up were far left like that. I mean, the intent from a Dick Hatcher, who was a loyal Democrat, might have been, let's see where our voices are. But when you had Mama Baraka and Dick Hatcher, who only basically politically have in common that they're of African descent. And, you know, we all agree on the outcomes for black people, but we don't agree on the process. So I think that's why there was never any agreement on the formulation of an independent black political party.
So see there, it's good to see you. It's good to see you.
You sure you don't want to have
This is-
a seat to light it?
Yeah, come on.
Do a proper introduction.
Yeah, and a proper introduction. Thank you. Thank you, sister.
I'm just saying.
Thank you. Introduce him, please.
This is W.L. Tony Harrison, former state representative from the
Great state of Alabama.
Alabama, organizer par excellence, crude, rude, but bad Negro who know how to organize and played a major role in Gary. So his voice is important. I didn't know he was going to be here, or we would have had him on the panel and so forth. And I'm sitting back because I got some interpretation too, but I have time to go later.
And I guess there was more commonality between Richard and Barack Emiri than folks want to acknowledge. Both of them were on a page. And that page was, how do you have the greatest impact on this body politic? And the phrase that comes to mind is unity without uniformity, was the catchphrase that was operative in that environment. And the dance was, how can we come out of this environment with as much operational unity as possible for going forward and have the greatest impact on the body politic at that moment, time, and place?
And do you think that that was established as a result of Gary? And you look at the election that followed, Nixon won. Basically, what was the strategy coming out of Gary politically?
My perception is that the strategy was an immersion into the body politic and engagement in this process.
But
Bill, Lucy, you want to speak?
at the same time, developing the capacity ourselves to play a much larger role in coming elections. Example, I mean, much of the discussion there was about grassroots politics, voter registration, voter mobilization, et cetera, et cetera. So out of it came some major institutions, Joint Senate and Joint Senate Work, which out of that came DEP, and which is now the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. NBC Leo, National Caucus of Black local elected officials, the National Black Caucus of State Legislatures is an idea that sprung up there. All of these things to empower the black community for future elections, not necessarily focused on a presidential race of our own, but to have the infrastructure there in the event you wanted to run for the election. We talked about the ability to raise resources. We're still talking about that. But the key thing is that if you're going to have a candidate who is accountable to the community, they can't have a long day with somebody from the other side of town. So how do we do that? So there was a lot of things that grew out of that made it possible for then elected officials to represent themselves much stronger within the Democratic Party process. I mean, Dick Hatcher wound up being the chairperson of the Caucus of Black Democrats, which is the internal machinery for Black campaigns.
I want to get a response from the youngest member of our panel. And I appreciate that. You mentioned Gary, Indiana, to most young people, and they're probably their frame of references, the Jackson 5.
Depends on the conscious black people raising them.
Yeah.
I saw you guys with pride. I know all the instruments speaking, I was just waiting.
There you go.
And that's what I'm at. So as you know, a very informed young woman, young student, or politically astute, well-informed activist. How much of this was new information to you?
None of it, but my radio show and my activism were the things that I was raised were incumbent upon me because civil service and civic activity. But I ran for mayor last year of Baltimore, who's been run by Democrats only since 1967 as an unaffiliated candidate. So my analysis over the course of the last 40 years, much like Mrs. Coretta Scott King and Mrs. Shabazz, I'm a widow already at 31 of the effects of our not having figured out this yet and how to make it manifest for our children. So while y'all were watching the movie, we were watching these babies because mine is at school right now about to turn 9. You all convened almost 9 years ago to the day from my birth in this convention, and in 40 years, we're still asking what to do instead of figuring out how to do it. I'm a results person. You know what I mean? I don't have time to march and rally, not to say that that's not effective, but it's not where I live in this area. That was in your time. If you want, why do we create a new black party? If the structure is not going to change the Constitution, be unaffiliated, be unafraid, like Jesse was saying, to just step out of the both parties. It very clearly states in the Gary Declaration, that is the document that was produced and published after that 3 days, that we didn't have any faith or trust in either party. And yet, I live in a city that is predominantly black, and women that look like they could have been my grandmothers curse me for my audacity to run for mayor against their Democratic black baby girl for no other reason than I'm not a Democrat. In 2010, when I was the youngest in the state of Maryland, directed the Baltimore City portion of the campaign for the re-election of Governor Bob Early, who was a Republican, did not just older, but everyone tell me I was a sellout to my race because I worked for the candidate that put education back in prisons, that gave the ability to then get a diploma which had been denied because of the Democratic governor's misspending. There somehow was our less black. So now, the question for me is, since defining black and defining a black agenda has still not made any less black men go to prison, has still not made any less substantial policy initiatives. In 2015, I think in 5-year plans, but what are the elders going to do before they leave, before we are commemorating Dr. Height like we did at Coppet, and she's not with us to tell us herself, and we're having it translated through people that knew her. What are y'all that's still here going to do for her? I'm out here.
What time is it?
Nation.
I wanted to talk about the role of labor in that Gary convention. We know that there was some concern on the part of the labor unions that some were deciding whether or not to be neutral in the election.
Organized labor in the 72 election.
Turn on the mic.
I'm sorry. Organized labor in the 72 presidential election looked at both candidates, 4 prior years of Nixon or whatever, and decided to be neutral. After black labor had spent 4 years highlighting the downside of Nixon policies, it was just unreasonable to assume that you go back to your community and said that there's really no fundamental difference between the two candidates on domestic policy or foreign policy. McGovern was so far beyond the conservative role of Nixon. Plus the fact that Nixon probably hidden to a lot of folks. He really put his so-called Southern strategy out there. This is how I'm going to run, which was clearly a segregation, approach to national politics. And so we split. Well, I shouldn't say we split, but we formed what we thought would be at least a voice of education and mobilization on behalf of Black communities who had a high role in the labor in terms of numbers. And what wound up happening is our presence, our very presence on the other side of the issue forced any number of unions to rethink the neutrality position and ultimately form a labor form of government committee, because they had no Black support for neutrality and had absolutely none for those who were going to support Richard Nixon. And I guess you could argue about whether either party makes a difference. It does make a difference who winds up being the president. It makes a major difference.
Yes.
And so from a pragmatic point of view, we could not have McGovern win without us. We were the deciding piece. And not have Nixon win without him knowing we opposed him. And in the end, Nixon won. We certainly could talk to people on the Black labor side, because like in the Obama campaign, if you asked how many of us thought he could win that,
That's true.
you could have that, sort of, and the fact that if we really listen to our community, if you really have an ear on the ground, you could tell in 2007 that there was something going on. You may not have been able to define it, but there was something fundamentally different than we had ever seen before in a presidential race. We think the role that we tried to play in Gary and the role we try to play now is to really be a bridge between our community and organized labor and ultimately the Democratic Party. Not to say that the overwhelming majority of African Americans are Democrats, for better or for worse. We tried for many years and continue to try to change that structure. There's nothing more challenging than trying to reinvent the wheel, take over the wheel. That seems to make a lot of sense.
Is the labor union, or the labor unionists strategizing around the upcoming election?
Oh, yeah.
And what precisely is the strategy? I guess part of the question also is it time for another Gary convention, even though we have a President Obama?
Yeah.
I think it is. I think it is. It'll be somewhat less challenging than before. But I think we need to harness a whole lot of energy, bring it to a place and talk about issues that are currently on the mind. I agree with the other here. A lot of things that folks talk about is not what's on people's mind. It is the economy. But even with a good economy, what does that mean to us?
Yes. Yes.
And I think that kind of discussion has got to be held. While we really busted the gut on international issues for Africa in particular, how does that fit into our current situation? I had a meeting one night with a fellow from Angola. We were talking about the implications of energy and the impact on the Black community. He said, well, this ain't about color. Yeah, it is about, it is. Once you get to a certain level, then global issues become the dominant issue that dictates how the economy is going to be shaped and ran. And we got to have
a day where every Black person changed their voter registration affiliation to unaffiliated. Each Black person made themselves a constituency of one. They weren't not going to be able to notice. Didn't take us to do anything, didn't cost anything. If we would do that first and then have a convention, would I be for it? But if we're not going to position ourselves for our issues once we define them to mean anything to any candidate that comes out, then it is a moot point. And we're just continuing to show that we know how to bring ourselves together. Again, it's for show, but if you're looking for results, I watched the Move On organization convene on Valentine's Day as part of the Occupy Wall Street, that everyone go and take their money out of a big bank that got a bailout and move it all to a credit union or community-based loan. Of course, everybody in America didn't do it, but a certain the banks noticed when hundreds of people from different states, you understand what I'm saying, made this attempt on one single day of solidarity. We could do that. But the other side of it is, do we really know what we want? Do we really understand what our issues are? In the actual declaration, the 4 major issues were electing a proportionate number of black representatives to Congress, and yet we continue to support the first one that got elected in our city. So I have a city council person that's been in city council longer than I've been alive,
Right.
and nobody can move up, and we're not grooming our next generation of
Thank you.
politicians because we're loyal
Thank
for the next one, and we're not grooming. The second issue was community-controlled schools. I'm the youngest member of the PTA at my son's school. Grandparents come to the PTA. Women's education, as Dr. Malvo said, becomes so unimportant to us after we fought so hard to have a right to it without being killed. National health insurance. Every black person in America should have been behind our president, Republican, independent, or not, because the health disparities are killing us. That's what you told me in '72. And in '09, I know how many people I know that have clout that I didn't see behind that man when he tried. The elimination of capital punishment. I don't particularly, as a parent, live in a country where there are diseased people of all colors that do horrendous things to children, say that I am against it. What I will tell you is that much like the war on drugs, the sentencing disparity and disproportionate use of capital punishment is something that only through policy can be changed. I don't mind convening if we want to have a day of solidarity to say, leave both them parties alone and make them work.
I want to pose this question to the general panel, and anybody who wants to respond can just jump in. So how do we elevate these issues of concern to the black community, if not a Gary-like convention? How do we elevate the fact that, you know, unemployment is soaring through the roof? If you have a roof, with the foreclosure situation in America, the criminal population, the fastest growing prison population is African American women. Also, the fastest growing population of homeless veterans are African American women. How do we address these issues in the context of an Obama administration? It's time for perhaps an Abe Randolph, Franklin D. Roosevelt moment where he tells, the president tells Abe Randolph, go out and make me do it. Is that what's necessary here with the Obama administration?
Well, I think it is, actually. I think there are a couple of things going on. In the Gary Declaration, there is not a lot of discussion, our sister listed the key 4 points, there's not a lot of discussion about the economy and poverty. 1972 was a time when the unemployment rate was relatively modest. In today's times, it was 5.6%. Today, it's 8.3% overall. The black unemployment rate was about 11%. Today, it's about 15%. So we were not in quite such dire economic times as we are now, but the basic ratio is what we say. We have about twice the unemployment that other people do. When you look at the poverty data, and I think it's really important to look at that, the poverty rate in 2010 was 15.1%. It was 14.3% the previous year. So we've seen poverty spiraling out of control. Our young people, 18 and under, we represent 24% of the population, but 34% of those who are poor. And you know, I would recite these statistics on Dawson. But the fact is that we have not, as a people, organized around the elimination of poverty, nor have we necessarily organized around economic parity. Reverend Jackson referred to it a little bit, and Gary and his work has been dedicated to that, the Wall Street Project, to making sure that we're full economic participants. But we really have not had a full economic participation conversation. Part of it is because we really are schizophrenic people. I mean, people who don't want to talk about the Bush tax cut think they're going to get rich with it. Excuse my language, but they think they're going to get rich. So when I get my $1 million, do I want to pay more taxes? My brother, you're not going to get $1 million. So, forget about it. But we don't want to talk about these economic issues because we bought into this hype that it's class warfare. And here's the deal. When you have one person who's poor, you can call it a personal problem. When you have 46 million poor people in America, this is a political problem. This is not a personal problem. And so it has to be framed that way. And I'm not sure that African American people have been ready to do that. Do we want to have another Gary? I don't know. I mean, we pull, as Brother Daniels, who's done the Save the Black World Conference, we pull these conferences together. We spend a lot of resources. time, effort, energy, and money. People put a lot of money into US Air and whatever airline pocket, into Sheraton and whatever else hotel pocket. And then what do we come out of it? I mean, that's the real question. We have very rich conversations, but then what do we come out of it? We could do a virtual Gary. We could actually do a virtual Gary with some YouTube and some other things like that. Downloading things like this and really having people organize. Because it's really more about local organizing. But also the thing is, everybody's looking at this Obama race, and we should, as I said, we kind of think about a president drowning. Or if my facial expression has nothing to do with radio. If I'm frowning, that's because I'm frowning. Around before I giggle. I can almost make myself sick with that one. So obviously, I think in the short run, we want to look at President Obama's reelection because the alternatives are awful. But at the same time, I think that we have our power is in the state and local races. So we want to see, as that lady has said, we want to see folks moving up. Now, I don't think that just because someone has longevity means they have to move over. I don't think just because they have to become ineffective. And that's because the question. If they become ineffective, maybe they need to move over. But we have not done anything in Joint Center, West End. Where do old black politicians go? You know, I mean, we have to find someplace where we go.
Hopefully to teach somebody that's really
Thank you, baby.
young.
Thank you.
As respectfully as I can. It's about the fact that until we stop having to count the first black city council, the first black this, and you do your 4 to 8 terms, have who you want to groom in the ways already picked out, do so. And make sure that if you're going to give your seat to them, you're going to be there as an elder and a resource of wisdom to help them be as effective as you were. And the requirement would be that they be looking for who they're going to bring behind them too.
Thank you.
I disagree with you. I mean,
Come to Baltimore. I'll show you all the decay that's left from people that think like that.
oh, okay, well, you know, I'll take that. But I think if people are ineffective, they move. But when they're not ineffective, if they're effective, I think they stay. I think that I do think that people must groom people. I do think that people must groom people. I think they don't need to groom one because I think that's crazy and foolhardy. I think they need to groom 6 because let something happen to that one. But I think that we need to groom cadres of people. But I've got like 700 students and 30 active mentees. So people that I sow into their life on a regular basis. I think that many of us are committed to mentorship. I'm not committed to moving people out because they will.
Thank you both for that very line of saying. Dr. Williams, we have numerous African American women serving in Congress today and active in practically every aspect of political life. But are they influencing, how much are they influencing policy or affecting real change? And now, is there a big role for women to assume, black women to assume perhaps that it shows
Well, you know, I'm from the Ellis School where you find the good and praise it sometimes, you know, none of us will have all of the answers. But for years, many of us have had some of the answers and we continue to work. Now, the National Congress of Black Women, we honor all of the women who come to Congress because just getting elected to a position is a difficult challenge. I know I have run before and I know how difficult it is. When we work in the National Congress of Black Women, we start with the very young children and we do the very best we can. We can't do everything, but we start with College for Kids and we teach these young people about all the wonderful things they can be. We help them along the way into becoming college for teens and young ambassadors, and we keep up with them. Just, you know, last summer we sent a young man to Oxford to get the opportunity to go there but didn't have a way to get there. We did it. We call upon the black women in Congress and we can't call upon anybody else. All of them have been through our organization. They don't come to Washington without coming to our event and are honoring them for what they have done. And I think we have to appreciate what people before us have done. I mean, I know it's easy for young people to talk about us as though we never did anything and that what we did didn't work. But let me tell you exactly what they were talking about in Gary in 1972, about bringing us together and then bringing some decent white people along with us. We did it in 2008, so we shouldn't talk like we don't do things or we can't do things. We are doing things. And yes, those women members of Congress have to sit there every night just like everybody else does when they want to be at home with their own children. It's almost like being back in slavery. You know, mothers who wanted to keep their children couldn't always be there, but they were out there doing something for the greater good.
schisms within us as a people, if you look at us as a common denominator, as Reverend Jackson said, colorism, sexism, and generationalism. I knew I'd be the last to speak when I sat here because I clearly couldn't even have been alive when Gary happened, whether I had been born or not. I had the privilege of working with Coppin State University 3 years ago when we renamed the Social Studies Department for Dr. Height. And Congresswoman Lewis came and made a very touching speech because she had just passed 3 days before, and she was intended to be there when we renamed this whole part of Coppin to one of my sheepers. And he said, oftentimes was she the only woman in the room. Oftentimes was she ignored. And she still put up with us at our best, worst as black men to get our babies and our whole generation and our race to the next level. If we're really, truly, truly serious about the continuance of the relevancy of our people politically, will we have to overcome colorism? Will we have to overcome generationalism? Just when no one's saying, I don't teach none of my friends because I don't have to speak to you. No one's saying what you did wasn't important. But what I'm saying is that if at a certain table, what we think we can do next isn't equally as important, are we still hindering ourselves?
Yes.
And we have to let that sexism, generationalism, and colorism, because y'all know how that goes in certain areas, down south and other places, okay? We have to let it go for all of us, for all of us. And I just want our babies and my babies, grandbabies, to have benefits like I have from the work that you've done so that they can continue to be whatever they want to be and run from there at 30 if they feel like it, unafraid. That's it.